Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the slow rhythm of an ancient world, where the Nile still floods like clockwork, the desert wind hisses through stone corridors, and you, somehow, have just woken up inside a mud-brick home with reeds in your bed and grit in your teeth. The year? About 1500 BCE. The place? Somewhere between Memphis and Thebes. You blink at the ceiling, scratch your head, and sit up. You've got a long day ahead, full of farming, or scribing, or hauling something heavy somewhere hot, but first, you've got to clean your teeth. And no, there's no minty gel or electric hum. What you do have is a powdery mixture of crushed pumice, burned eggshell, and a dash of old donkey hooves, if you're lucky. Oh yes. You're going to need a moment. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from, and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle to the water basin, where someone has left a half-shell filled with gritty gray powder. That's your toothpaste, though the term, tooth abrasion death dust, might be more accurate. Egyptians took oral hygiene seriously. And by seriously, I mean they ground up rocks and bones and rubbed them on their teeth while saying prayers to Thoth. You're welcome. You dip your finger or a frayed twig into the powder, smear it across your teeth, and start scrubbing. It squeaks. There is definitely sand in there. Your gums are already offended. Welcome to morning breath in the Bronze Age. But don't worry, this is completely normal. Archaeological digs in Saqqara and Giza have turned up dozens of these early dental powders stored in small alabaster jars. Historians believe these jars were part of morning routines not just for pharaohs and priests, but for everyday people like you. You'd apply the powder with your finger or a chewed stick called a miswak, maybe dipped in palm wine for extra cleansing power, or for courage. This wasn't just about comfort. Clean teeth were spiritual. Egyptians believed that the body needed to be pristine in both life and death. A rotten mouth could offend the gods. And worse, it could mess up your chances in the afterlife. Imagine being turned away at the gates of eternity because your molars were too moldy. Still, dental care had its limitations. For all their rituals, the ancient Egyptians suffered from severe dental wear. Their bread, yes, that seemingly innocent daily staple, was the real villain. You see, every bite of barley bread came with a surprise: quartz dust. Thanks to their use of grindstones, sand and grit from the milling process often made it into the flour. Over decades, it ground their enamel down to nubs. Some skulls show teeth worn flat to the gums by age 30. Dental bliss, right? And let's not even talk about their version of dental floss. Okay, wait, let's. It was often a thin thread of linen or papyrus fiber, used carefully between molars. Not very effective, but it's the thought that counts. Still, you can imagine how satisfying it was to at least go through the motions, wake up, crush some eggshells, mumble a prayer, scrub away the sins of yesterday's beer bread combo. It's not unlike modern rituals. There's something universal about starting your day by pretending you've got it all together, even if you're holding a twig dipped in lizard ash. Historians still argue whether these practices were effective at preventing real disease or simply ritualistic. After all, medical papyri often blur the line between science and magic. But what's clear is that oral hygiene wasn't some idle luxury. It was baked into their worldview, pun completely intended. As you rinse your mouth with a sip of cool Nile water, you realize, it's not just your breath that's ancient now. It's your perspective. You've stepped into a world where the sacred and the mundane sit side by side. Where cleaning your teeth might also mean whispering to a god, avoiding demonic decay spirits, and hoping your molars don't betray you in the afterlife. You wipe your face, blink toward the rising sun, and head out the door, mouth freshly sandblasted, conscience slightly soothed. And just as you step over the threshold, someone passes by chewing on a stick of acacia bark, smiling with teeth already the color of river mud. You're not alone in this routine. Somewhere across the village, a priest is probably mixing his own powder, humming to himself. And over by the palace, some courtier is likely admiring his bright smile in a polished copper mirror, oblivious to the fact that his gums are slowly receding like the Nile in dry season. So, welcome to the day. You've survived your first Egyptian brushing. Probably. If your gums are bleeding, that's just part of the charm. And the best part? We've got many more dental delights to come. You head out into the soft, golden haze of morning. The city breathes with a slow pulse, papyrus boats creak gently on the river, market vendors arrange dates and onions, and somewhere in the distance, a donkey is loudly questioning the meaning of life. Your feet press into dry earth, and your mind drifts to everyone else brushing their teeth today. It's not just you. It's not just the priests or the pyramid builders. Everyone, from pharaohs wrapped in gold to farmers wrapped in yesterday's sweat, is dealing with the same question: how do I get rid of this awful morning breath? And the answer? Crushed rock, spit, and maybe a prayer or two. You make your way toward the fields, passing homes of mudbrick, and each one has its own tiny ritual. A scribe swirls a powder of salt and charcoal in a shell dish. A baker chews a stick of palm root between loaves. Children giggle as they pretend to scrub, mostly smearing soot on each other's cheeks. You even pass a noblewoman reclining in her shaded courtyard, gently tapping her teeth with a delicate twig while a servant fans her with a goose feather. Fancy. But here's the thing, no one actually smells fresh. Despite their best efforts, the average ancient Egyptian had breath that could probably curdle beer. The powdered pastes were abrasive but didn't exactly kill bacteria. In fact, the more fancy your diet, the worse your breath probably was. Pharaohs and the elite class ate soft, sticky foods, dried figs, honey cakes, dates stuffed with nuts, and sweet wines. Delicious? Absolutely. But all that sugar clung to the teeth like an offering to future cavities. Add to that the occasional roasted goose or rich stew, and you've got yourself a mouthful of royal regret. Meanwhile, peasants and laborers, despite having fewer sweets, still had problems. Their coarse bread, laced with sand and grit from stone mills, wore down their teeth so thoroughly that even if they did brush, there wasn't much enamel left to protect. Their diets may have been simpler, but their mouths still ended up as dental deserts. Historians still argue whether the ancient Egyptians fully understood the bacterial causes of decay, or whether they simply associated bad breath with evil spirits. Many believed in invisible forces that attacked the body, and the mouth was no exception. There are written spells meant to drive out the tooth worm, a mythical squiggly culprit blamed for dental pain. Honestly, if you've ever had a toothache, you'd probably believe in mouth-dwelling demons too. And yet, despite all these oral horrors, teeth were important symbols. A good smile meant you were clean, pure, and perhaps even favored by the gods. You didn't want to approach Osiris in the afterlife with a mouth full of rot. That would be like showing up to a royal banquet with lettuce in your teeth, only the lettuce is a decayed incisor. That's why even the poorest Egyptians found ways to scrub. Ash from the hearth, sand from the courtyard, a hint of natron, a natural mineral salt found in dry lake beds that served double duty as toothpaste and deodorant. Yes, You might clean your armpits and your molars with the same substance. Efficiency was key in a desert economy. For the wealthier citizens, there were specialty mixtures. Some included burnt myrrh, which at least smelled nice. Others had ox hooves, powdered into dust and mixed with water into a gritty paste. If you're trying not to gag, imagine smearing that on your gums before breakfast. And then there were those who didn't stop with brushing. They believed strongly in aromatic rinses. Palm wine infused with mint leaves was popular, though hard to come by. Some swished mouthfuls of warm beer. Others opted for boiled herbs or acacia bark steeped in vinegar. None of these killed germs effectively, but at least your breath would carry the soft tang of forest floor and sour grapes. There's one thing uniting all these people, highborn or low, barefoot or bejeweled, and that's the grimace after brushing. You rub your jaw and wonder if you've scrubbed off more tooth than plaque. Probably. But it's a clean kind of pain. It's the price of dignity. And across town, the pharaoh is doing something surprisingly similar. His brush might be gold-tipped, and his powder mixed by servants with imported resin, but he's still hunched over a basin, trying to erase the evidence of last night's honey-glazed duck. Even royalty can't escape the tyranny of molars. The difference is, he might have access to something truly luxurious, breath fresheners. Clove pods and cinnamon bark, imported from the mysterious land of Punt, were sometimes chewed by the elite. And while they did little to clean the teeth, they masked bad breath long enough to survive a public ceremony. You pass a small shrine on the way to your work site, and there's a carved image of a smiling god with a lotus flower near his lips. Perhaps a symbol of purity, or a reminder to check your breath before prayer. Either way, it's oddly comforting. Because even in a world of plagues, pyramids, and papyrus scrolls, humans are still humans. We all want to look presentable, feel fresh, and avoid offending anyone standing within breathing distance. You reach the fields or maybe the docks, wherever your work lies, and you realize, this ancient day has only just begun. But your teeth, they've already been through the ringer. And somewhere behind you, that noblewoman is still dabbing delicately at her gums with what looks suspiciously like a perfume-soaked feather. Must be nice. Now that your gums are still smarting from their morning pumice massage, let's get into what you actually use to clean those teeth. Because frankly, the recipe for ancient Egyptian toothpaste reads more like a cursed alchemy experiment than anything your dentist would recommend. And yet, there it was, tucked into small ceramic jars, sometimes labeled with neat hieroglyphs, and ready to ruin your molars with enthusiastic abrasiveness. The base of most ancient pastes. Crushed pumice. Yes, the volcanic rock. Lightweight, porous, and, when ground into powder, the ideal material to scrape away plaque, and possibly your soul. It was paired with ash, likely from burned plant material, and occasionally added bits of ox hooves or burnt eggshells. Sound delicious? It's not. You imagine opening a tiny pot filled with what looks like chalk dust mixed with gravel. You dip in a twig brush or your fingertip and start working it across your teeth. The sensation? Like brushing with beach sand, but without the ocean breeze to justify it. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians fully understood the long-term consequences of this method. The evidence suggests they didn't care about enamel, they were all about smooth surfaces and spiritual cleanliness. Modern studies of mummified remains show extreme wear on their teeth. Enamel worn completely away, exposing dentin and sometimes the nerve itself. So yes, their teeth were clean, but also dangerously bald. But before you judge too harshly, remember, this was cutting-edge oral technology for its time. They didn't have fluoride or floss. What they did have was natron, a naturally occurring salt mixture composed of sodium carbonate, sodium bicarbonate, and a bit of soda ash. Natron was a multipurpose miracle powder used for preserving mummies, drying out wounds, cleaning laundry, and, of course, brushing your teeth. So basically, you're rubbing mummy salt in your mouth every morning. Neat. And speaking of rubbing, let's talk about toothbrushes, or the ancient Egyptian answer to them. The miswak stick was common throughout the ancient world. Egyptians often used twigs from trees like the Salvadora persica, or even aromatic woods when they could find them. The ends were chewed and frayed to create bristles. These little chewed sticks were the multi-tools of dental hygiene, portable, mildly antiseptic, and vaguely minty if you chose the right wood. Or you could just use your finger and hope for the best. But occasionally, you'd get someone ambitious, a local healer or an overachieving priest, who added other ingredients to the mix. Crushed mint, myrrh, powdered resin from acacia trees, even dried iris petals. One recovered recipe suggested mixing these with vinegar, which, while good at dissolving grime, probably didn't feel great on open gum wounds. Then there were those experimental types who believed in using ground bones. Some even tried mixing ground animal teeth into the paste, under the belief that strong teeth would pass their essence into your own. That logic didn't hold up to science, but you can't fault them for being consistent in their weirdness. And if you were especially lucky, or unlucky, depending on how you feel about livestock, your paste might have a hint of ox hoof or donkey tendon ash. These animal parts were thought to lend strength and spiritual resilience. In reality, they were just more hard, abrasive particles in a mixture already halfway to being sandpaper. Despite all this grit, the idea was noble. Cleanliness, in Egyptian culture, wasn't just for appearance. It was sacred. Priests bathed multiple times a day, shaved their entire bodies, and performed oral rituals to ensure their breath didn't offend the gods. A clean mouth wasn't just hygiene, it was holiness. You can picture the daily prep of a temple priest, standing over a polished basin, carefully mixing his own paste by candlelight. He mumbles a prayer to Thoth or Horus, dips in a carved ivory stick, and begins to scrub with the patience of a man who believes his soul depends on it. Maybe it does. Meanwhile, in the city, a spice merchant tries to upsell a rare resin from the Levant, claiming it will bless your gums and whiten your smile. It's probably just tree sap, but the branding? On point. And let's not forget the farmers. With no access to imported luxuries, they made do with crushed river stones, burnt palm bark, or even leftover bread crusts. Anything gritty could be turned into an oral scrub. After all, when your bread already contains sand, what's a little more? There's a kind of beauty in this devotion. They didn't have dental charts or hygienists, but they cared. Even the poorest Egyptian took a few minutes to spit and scrub, to rub and rinse. It was part of being alive, part of staying pure. And sure, it wasn't perfect. Their molars didn't exactly win awards. But they were present. Intentional. And sometimes, just sometimes, that's enough. So as you chew the final twig fibers and rinse your mouth with water from a goatskin pouch, you're participating in something timeless. Something ancient. Something that somehow tastes like charcoal and broken dreams. And as the sun climbs higher and the city comes fully alive, you can't help but wonder, if everyone's brushing with rocks, who decided that was a good idea? Probably someone with really strong gums. Or really persuasive marketing skills. Either way, your teeth are cleanish, your breath is slightly less offensive, and the gods. Hopefully, they're pleased. By now, your gums have adjusted to their daily abrasion therapy, and your tongue is beginning to accept the constant presence of lingering grit. But in ancient Egypt, cleaning your teeth wasn't just a matter of physical cleanliness, it was spiritual, symbolic, and sometimes downright magical. That's right. Tonight, we venture into the world of gods, gums, and the ancient equivalent of magical mouthwash. You walk past the temple district, where limestone columns rise like frozen sails against the sun. Here, cleanliness is sacred. The priests of Horus and Thoth are already at their ablutions, scrubbing every inch of themselves with natron, shaving off every hair, and yes, cleansing their mouths with sacred powders. Not because they're vain, but because an unclean mouth can defile a ritual. When you speak to the gods, you'd better make sure your breath doesn't smell like last night's fermented lentil stew. There are scrolls, real ones, not just stories, that describe rituals to banish mouth demons and protect one's speech from spiritual decay. Certain prayers had to be spoken while chewing specific herbs or rinsing the mouth with sanctified water. Imagine combining your morning routine with a divine Zoom call. One wrong word, or scent, and you might spiritually mute yourself. One particularly peculiar practice involved rinsing the mouth with a solution made from incense steeped in water. The incense, usually frankincense or myrrh, was first burned in a brazier, then the ash was gathered, steeped, strained, and used as mouthwash. Not exactly minty, but undeniably fragrant. And possibly acidic enough to etch a name in limestone. Historians still debate whether these rinses had any medical value, or if they were purely symbolic. Some scholars argue the antibacterial properties of certain resins may have helped reduce inflammation. Others think it was mostly for show, like wearing cologne before performing a sacred chant. Either way, it was believed that certain plants, burned and spoken over by a priest, could purify not just your breath, but your words. And what of the gods? Well, there were quite a few with a stake in your oral health. Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom and writing, was often invoked in rituals of clarity and speech. If you were reciting prayers or spells, you might ask for his blessing, and fresh breath. Hathor, goddess of beauty and joy, was another divine name dropped when discussing clean teeth and radiant smiles. After all, what's beauty without oral hygiene? Even Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess of war and healing, made occasional appearances in medicinal texts related to mouth pain. She could bring disease, yes, but she could also take it away. If you had an infected tooth, it might be said that Sekhmet was punishing you, or maybe you just ate too many fig cakes. As you wander through the bazaar, you hear snippets of charm songs and prayers being sold alongside bundles of herbs. One to calm the aching gum, says a seller, offering a wax tablet etched with words and wrapped around a stick of cinnamon bark. You buy one, naturally. Can't hurt, right? But beyond incense and divine intervention, there were actual magical spells. In the famous Ebers Papyrus, a sprawling medical text filled with everything from hemorrhoid treatments to crocodile bite remedies, there are entire sections dedicated to dental pain. And many of them begin with invocations, say these words over the affected tooth, followed by a string of phrases meant to drive out the pain. One particularly vivid charm speaks directly to the imagined worm in the tooth. Come out, O worm. Crawl away, O evil spirit. Be gone from this mouth. Apparently, shouting at your molars was the ancient Egyptian version of Tylenol. Of course, you'd also apply a poultice of ground barley and honey, maybe mixed with beer. The beer was optional. The shouting? Absolutely essential. You reach a quiet courtyard where an elderly woman is teaching a child to chant softly while dipping a twig in a bowl of milky white liquid. It smells like chamomile and burned wood. She instructs him to swirl and spit, then press a hand to his cheek and whisper a prayer of gratitude to Bes, the dwarf god of protection. Even tiny gods had roles in keeping your mouth safe from unseen evils. And it's here you realize something: oral health in ancient Egypt wasn't just about avoiding pain or looking nice. It was about respect. Respect for the body, for the gods, and for the power of words. A clean mouth wasn't just healthier. It was holier. So tonight, as you lie back on your linen mat and feel the lingering tingle of natron and incense water along your gum line, you know you've done more than just clean your teeth. You've honored tradition. You've warded off invisible spirits. And you've made yourself a little more acceptable to the divine, bad breath and all. It's humbling, really, to think that for thousands of years, people have stared down a toothache with nothing but hope, herbs, and the occasional shout at a toothworm. And here you are, floating in that history, mouth rinsed and mind quieted, with nothing more to do but rest. Just be glad you haven't had to gargle with copper filings, yet. Night has returned to the Nile, and you're curled on your mat, drifting half asleep, when a strange sensation tugs at your thoughts, the ache of an old molar. It's not your imagination. You're still in ancient Egypt, remember, and if you thought toothaches were a modern inconvenience, you're about to discover how very wrong you are. Because here in the land of papyrus scrolls and sun gods, people didn't just worry about dental pain in life. They worried about it in death. As you ease back into the rhythm of this strange world, picture yourself inside a royal tomb, not as a tourist, but as the one being buried. You're wrapped in linen, adorned with amulets, and packed with all your favorite items: food, perfume, linen, wigs, possibly a small board game to pass the eternity. And among the treasures, a tiny container of tooth cleaning powder, tucked discreetly alongside a bronze mirror and a comb. Why? Because in ancient Egyptian belief, your journey didn't end with death. The afterlife was real, physical, and full of bureaucratic challenges. You'd be judged, your heart weighed, your sins counted. But beyond that, you'd be living again. Eating, drinking, laughing, possibly farming if you weren't that lucky. And yes, you'd still need your teeth. That's why tomb walls and burial goods reflect a striking attention to dental concerns. Among the dozens of grave items archaeologists have found in elite tombs, hygiene tools are a surprising regular. Ivory toothpicks, small jars of dental paste, even bundles of chewing sticks. If heaven was anything like daily life, you'd want a fresh smile when you got there. Historians still debate whether this meant ancient Egyptians actually believed they'd be brushing in the next world, or whether it was symbolic, one final act of purification before meeting the gods. But the presence of such tools speaks volumes. It wasn't just about status. It was about readiness. After all, Osiris probably doesn't appreciate halitosis. You shift, imagining the soft whisper of linen wrappings brushing your skin. A priest leans in, places an amulet shaped like a lotus blossom on your chest, then mutters something about sweet breath for eternal praise. A lovely thought, if only your back molar would stop throbbing. The truth is, by the time most ancient Egyptians died, their teeth were in rough shape. Mummy X-rays consistently reveal extensive wear, abscesses, and infections. One noblewoman buried in Thebes was discovered with an entire molar cracked in half, and a ball of linen stuffed into the cavity, presumably soaked in oil or resin. A primitive form of filling? Possibly. Or maybe just an act of desperation. And yet, even in these painful realities, there was ceremony. The opening of the mouth ritual, one of the most important funerary acts, involved touching the deceased's lips and jaw with ceremonial tools to open their senses for the afterlife. Eyes to see, ears to hear, mouth to eat and speak. It was theatrical, symbolic, and just a little ironic, considering the state of most ancient mouths. You can almost see the priest, holding a small adze, an odd-looking blade, before touching it to the mummy's mouth. He chants, he prays, and somewhere in the spiritual bureaucracy, you're reauthorized to talk, chew, and taste once more. Good thing you packed your pumice powder. This preoccupation with dental readiness didn't just apply to pharaohs. Even commoners were sometimes buried with humble hygiene kits. Clay jars with traces of chalk, broken sticks worn at one end, possibly even linen strips used as floss. It was rare, but meaningful. The suggestion being, if your soul continues, so do your habits. And maybe that's why some tomb murals show banquets and feasts, scenes of joy and leisure, but rarely the painful truth behind the smiles. Imagine grinning at your neighbor in the field of reeds, your jaw aching and half your teeth ground down to nubs. Not quite paradise, but at least you're not still chewing sand bread. There's a certain poetry in it. The idea that our most basic human routines, brushing our teeth, cleaning our faces, are carried with us into eternity. Maybe it's superstition. Or maybe it's hope. That even in death, we can be fresh, clean, and just a little more human. Of course, there's also the not-so-romantic angle. If you were rich, you could afford posthumous dental repairs. Archaeologists have found mummies with resin-packed sockets, gold wires bracing a tooth in place, or even decorative inlays, more for show than function. Not quite the same as a crown from your neighborhood dentist, but hey, it sparkled under torchlight. And here's a strange one. One mummy was discovered with what appeared to be lentils stuffed into a mouth wound. Scholars can't agree if this was an attempt to soothe pain, a symbolic offering, or just misplaced lunch. The debate continues. As you stretch out beneath the stars, feeling the warm weight of history pressing gently on your chest, you begin to realize something oddly comforting. For all their greatness, the pyramids, the temples, the dazzling rituals, the Egyptians were just like us. They feared toothaches. They cared about breath. They wanted to be remembered not just for their deeds, but for their dignity. And so, in their final moments, as linen wraps tightened and tomb doors sealed, they made sure their mouths were clean. Not perfect. Not pain-free. But clean enough to whisper one last word to the gods. You turn on your side, breathing slow, listening to the hush of the Nile in your imagination. And somewhere, in a tomb long sealed, a mummy smiles just wide enough to show a flash of pumice-worn enamel. You wake to the smell of warm dust and the faint scent of date bread wafting through the alleys. The toothache you dreamed about last night is gone, replaced by a growing curiosity, who actually fixed people's teeth back then? Surely not just anyone could yank a molar with a copper hook or stuff linen into a jaw abscess, right? Well, that depends on how brave, or desperate, you were. In ancient Egypt, there wasn't exactly a certified dentist's office waiting on the corner with a sign that said, "Painless extractions, walk-ins welcome." Instead, you'd find yourself at the mercy of a very specific kind of practitioner, part healer, part magician, part, "I have no idea what I'm doing but here's a knife." These were the iatromants, a term later used by the Greeks, but the function existed much earlier. They were healers trained in both physical remedies and spiritual protection. And sometimes, if your molar was misbehaving, they were the only ones with the guts, or recklessness, to do something about it. You wander into the neighborhood of artisans, past men shaping alabaster jars and women weaving linen, and you hear the unmistakable sound of metal scraping on stone. You follow the noise to a small courtyard where a man with an oiled beard is heating what looks like a bronze spatula over a flame. This is your guy. Not a dentist, per se, but someone who's read parts of the Ebers papyrus and is confident enough to get in there with tongs. The tools of the trade. Surprisingly advanced for the time, if also terrifying. Copper tweezers, bone spatulas, slender chisels, and even mouth props made of wood or ivory. The ancient toolkit could rival a medieval blacksmith's bench. Only difference is, these were going inside people. Some scholars suggest that certain temple priests doubled as surgeons, combining herbal treatments with cautious surgery. Others think the so-called dentists were just the least squeamish among local healers. Historians still argue whether there was an actual professional dental class, or if the role of oral care was lumped in with general healing, and occasional guesswork. Regardless, when someone had a swollen jaw, a cracked tooth, or a mouth full of pus, they didn't care who showed up. They just wanted the pain to stop. So you sit and observe. A patient leans back on a clay bench, mouth wide open, sweat beading on his brow. The healer hums to himself, dips a copper tool into hot resin, then carefully, almost artfully, packs it into a hollowed-out cavity. Is it sterile? No. Is it effective? Depends on the gods. And speaking of gods, many procedures involved prayer and ritual. Before a tooth was touched, the healer might recite a protective incantation, appealing to Sekhmet to stay her wrath or to Best to guard against infection. These weren't just theatrics, they were believed to be necessary steps. If you skipped the magic, the medicine might not work. Some treatments bordered on charmingly strange. One ancient recipe called for the application of mashed green dates mixed with donkey fat, applied to the gums while whispering a hymn. Another involved placing a bit of old crocodile fat near the cheek and binding it with linen overnight. Whether this helped or merely distracted from the agony is, frankly, unclear. But sometimes, when no potion or prayer worked, you'd have to resort to the ultimate act, extraction. And it wasn't gentle. The healer would heat a metal hook or clamp, pry the tooth loose, sometimes in pieces, and hope the bleeding stopped. No anesthetic. No sterilization. Just willpower and a strong grip. Recovery was a game of luck. Infections were common, and in extreme cases, the toothache wasn't what killed you, it was the cure. You see one such procedure unfold as you pass by a street healer's stall. A teenager sits stiffly while his mother holds his hand. The healer taps the side of his face, murmurs a prayer, then nods. The boy braces. One tug, a sharp cry, and it's done. The offending molar, cracked and blackened, sits glistening in the sunlight. A crowd claps politely. The boy looks faint. You move on. And yet, for all the primitive conditions, the intention behind these acts feels familiar. Compassion, desperation, ritual, and trial and error. The same ingredients we use in medicine today, just with fewer gloves and more incense. There are even cases where gold wire was used to bind teeth, an early form of dental bridge. Some scholars believe this was more symbolic than functional, possibly even applied after death to maintain appearance in the tomb. But others argue that elites may have worn decorative mouthpieces in life, marking wealth with every glint of their smile. It's hard to say for sure. As with many things in ancient Egypt, the line between medicine and magic is beautifully blurry. A poultice might come with a poem. A filling might require a feast. And a toothache might be treated with both resin and a riddle. As you stroll back toward the riverbank, past reed huts and painted walls, you pass a boy chewing thoughtfully on a stick of licorice root. His face is calm. His teeth, white against the sun, show only slight wear. For now, he's safe from the healer's bench. But not forever. Because in this world, like ours, no one escapes the dentist. Not even when your dentist also happens to chant spells and casually use crocodile fat. The sun is high now, pressing down on mud brick walls and reflecting in shimmering gold off the Nile. You're taking a break in the shade of a sycamore tree, watching a pair of workers wrestle an overloaded bread cart down a rutted road. And you can't help but smile. Because if there's one thing ancient Egyptians knew how to do, besides worship cats and invent paper, it was bake. And yet, lurking beneath all those fresh loaves and sticky date cakes, was dental doom. Let's talk sugar. Or, more precisely, natural sugars, the kind that sneak into every sacred feast, temple offering, and afternoon snack in ancient Egypt. While refined sugar didn't exist yet, the Egyptian diet still had plenty of sweet troublemakers. Dates, honey, figs, and beer all carried sugar that loved nothing more than to linger on your molars and throw a fermentation party. You bite into a soft cake made of mashed dates and ground barley, sweetened with honey and wrapped in a fig leaf. It's delicious. Dense, chewy, and warm from the oven. You savor it. And then realize, so do the bacteria in your mouth. Historians still argue whether ancient Egyptians fully grasped the link between sweet foods and tooth decay. There's evidence they knew that certain foods caused pain later, but whether they blamed the sugar or the tooth worms is another matter. One thing's for sure, their beloved staples didn't do their smiles any favors. Beer, for instance, was a dietary cornerstone. Everyone drank it. Even children. It was made from partially baked loaves of bread, soaked in water, fermented, and strained through linen. The result? A thick, porridge-like brew rich in calories, and sugar. It filled your stomach, gave you energy, and, unfortunately, coated your teeth in fermenting joy. Pair that with soft, sticky foods like honey-glazed goose or cakes filled with ground nuts, and you've got a perfect storm for plaque buildup. There were even luxury confections, small candies made of crushed dates and honey formed into little balls or pressed into decorative molds. If you were wealthy, you could afford to rot your teeth in style. And this wasn't a once-a-year indulgence. These foods were regular parts of the diet, especially during religious festivals. During offerings to the gods, temples would prepare tables stacked with honey bread, fruit, dried raisins, and sweet wine. What the gods didn't take, surprise, went straight to the mouths of the priests and workers. As you imagine yourself munching a honey date triangle at a temple celebration, you feel a little sympathy for your ancient enamel. All this celebration came at a cost. In fact, analysis of mummified skulls shows a surprisingly high rate of dental abscesses among upper-class Egyptians. Why? Because the rich had more access to these sweet luxuries. It's ironic, really, wealth didn't protect their health. It just made it tastier to ruin. Down by the granaries, you spot a young boy carrying a woven basket of coarse loaves, his family's daily ration. Even this humble bread, made from emmer wheat and barley, came with its own hazards. The grain was ground on stone querns, and fine sand often made its way into the flour. So every bite carried a sprinkle of quartz, extra minerals, sure, but also effective at slowly filing your teeth into oblivion. No one was safe. The only possible exception: those who stuck to leaner diets, simple onions, lentils, water. Not by choice, of course. These were the poorest Egyptians, living on the edge of famine, eating what they could find. Their reward? Less sugary decay, but still plenty of wear and tear from all the grit. And let's not forget about dried fruits. A staple in almost every household, especially during the flood season when fresh produce was scarce. Dried figs and dates were delicious, and clingy. They stuck between teeth, hid in molars, and turned each meal into a sticky endurance test. You lean back against the tree and think about it. For all their cleverness, the Egyptians couldn't win this battle. Sweetness was a gift from the gods, and a slow poison for their smiles. Still, they tried. They brushed, they rinsed, they prayed. But their love of sugar was, ultimately, greater than their fear of toothaches. You glance over at a nearby merchant unwrapping a sweet ball of pomegranate and date paste. He pops it in his mouth with a grin. His teeth, yellowed, slightly chipped, but somehow still charming. Maybe that's the lesson. It's not about avoiding decay. It's about savoring what you love, and living long enough to complain about it. So go ahead. Take another bite of that date cake. Chew slowly. Regret it later. Just don't forget to thank the gods, and maybe rinse with some frankincense water before bed. Because nothing says, eternal soul, like molars full of honey. The air grows cooler as evening returns to the banks of the Nile. You stroll lazily through the neighborhood of the scribes, those cloaked in linen, ink-stained fingers tapping at reed pens, and you begin to wonder, what did they write about teeth? Surely, if the ancients put so much effort into oral care, some clever scribe must have documented it beyond just recipes and rituals. And yes, dear dreamer, they did. Welcome to the Papyrus Scrolls, Egypt's ancient blogs. Hidden among spells for snake bites and instructions for embalming the liver, you'll find nuggets of insight into dental dilemmas, recorded in elegant, looping hieratic script. The most famous of these is the Ebers Papyrus, dated around 1550 BCE. It's not just a dusty medical document, it's a 110-page epic of every bodily woe you could imagine, including a fair share of mouth maladies. Toothaches, bleeding gums, loose teeth, they're all there, squeezed between cures for baldness and how to check if someone is pregnant. Spoiler, it involves barley. One particular prescription advises that if a tooth is causing pain, you should mash together cumin, frankincense, and onion, apply it to the tooth, and chant a protective spell over it. It doesn't say how long to keep the paste on. Possibly until your mouth bursts into tears. You watch a local scribe kneeling in a shaded nook, unrolling a narrow strip of papyrus. His brush dances over the surface with swift flicks. What he's writing, you can't tell. But you like to imagine it's a complaint about last week's mouth rinse recipe. Next time, less donkey fat. Historians still argue whether these recipes were primarily medicinal or spiritual. Many involved ingredients that had little clinical value, like lizard fat or crushed amulets. Some contain genuinely helpful items. Myrrh, for instance, has antiseptic properties. But most treatments walked a fine line between pharmacy and poetry. There were spells, too. Long, winding invocations meant to drive out the tooth demon or mouth spirit. One charming example: depart from this mouth, O tormentor. Be cast out like the sand from the riverbed. It's unclear whether the pain ever left, but the drama certainly stayed. You see, to the ancient Egyptians, the body wasn't just flesh, it was spiritual real estate. Every part had meaning, and every affliction had an unseen origin. If your tooth hurt, it might be infected, or it might be the punishment of a god you forgot to thank at dinner. So remedies weren't just about mashing herbs. They were about intention, timing, and divine alignment. Some prescriptions were seasonal. Others required certain phases of the moon. Imagine needing a molar pulled, but the moon's not full yet. Guess you're waiting, with a swollen face and the world's angriest tooth. And yet, for all this complexity, these scrolls give us something beautiful, proof that people cared. That they took time to record what worked, what didn't, and what might soothe the ache long enough to get on with life. Beyond the Ebers papyrus, there are references in other texts too. The Hearst papyrus and Cahan papyrus contain fragments of dental observations, often jumbled in with veterinary advice. Yes, they occasionally used the same treatments for horses and humans. Not ideal, unless your dentist also trims hooves. Interestingly, dental metaphors pop up in Egyptian poetry and religious texts as well. Strong teeth are equated with strength of character. Rotten teeth imply moral decay. And one rather dark love poem says, "I long for your kiss until my teeth fall from desire." Romantic, in a vaguely orthodontic way. You wander into a small home where a family is gathered around a low table, passing down old family wisdom. A grandmother recites from memory, "If the tooth throbs, boil the reed, rub the root, and speak no evil." It's not in any scroll, but it might as well be. Oral tradition ran alongside written records, each reinforcing the other. Recipes were shared, improved, forgotten, and rediscovered, just like now. In fact, many Egyptian remedies found their way into later Greek and Roman medicine. Galen, Hippocrates, and others echoed the wisdom of these ancient scribes, sometimes without even realizing it. A whisper from a 3,000-year-old reed brush still echoes in modern dental textbooks. And while these medical papyri are a treasure trove, they're also a window into something more profound, the eternal human need to explain pain. To control it, name it, and push it away with ink, ritual, or at the very least, a decent poultice. As night deepens, you settle beneath a canopy of stars and imagine those old scribes, hunched over their ink pots, cataloging the aches of the world. They probably had toothaches of their own. Maybe they even chuckled while writing that one particularly odd remedy, apply lizard tail with fig juice at sunset. Did it work? Doubtful. But the effort? That's eternal. So rest easy, knowing that long before fluoride or floss, people were trying. Writing, chanting, chewing, grinding, fighting the same battles you do, just with fewer tools and more onion paste. Because even in a civilization built on stone, tooth pain was a very human crack in the facade. The streets are quiet now, dust finally settling after a long day of baking sun and murmuring prayers. The Nile glistens like brushed bronze in the moonlight, and you're walking slowly, lazily, past the homes of middle-class artisans. Here, not everything is gold and obsidian, just simple courtyards, practical tools, and people making do. And that's where we'll linger for a while, among the everyday Egyptians and their everyday tooth troubles. Not everyone could afford imported incense or fig tree chew sticks. Most people, farmers, potters, brewers, fishers, lived on humble means. Their dental care? Pragmatic, local, and sometimes painfully inventive. You duck into a small home, past a cooking pot bubbling with lentils and a child trying to smash a date pit with a stone. The mother is preparing a rudimentary toothpaste from what she has, ground brick dust, a pinch of natron, a few drops of sour beer. She mixes it with her finger, dips in a chewed twig, and nods. Good enough. You can almost feel the grit between your teeth just watching her. Historians still argue whether these humble folk had worse teeth than their wealthier counterparts. You'd assume yes, less access to expensive herbs or gold fillings. But interestingly, poor Egyptians may have had fewer cavities. Why? Less sugar. Fewer honey cakes. More onions, lentils, and unleavened bread. Sure, their teeth were ground down by sand, but less of that sugary fermenting sludge stuck around to rot them from within. That said, the wear was intense. Bread was the main culprit. Grains ground on sandstone querns left microscopic grit in the flour. So each bite scraped enamel like microscopic sandpaper. Think of it as brushing your teeth with every meal, just in the wrong direction. You sit beside a fisherman sharpening hooks, his smile revealing flat, worn-down teeth. There's no visible decay, but no real biting power either. Just 2 rows of polished stubs that once were molars. They tell a story of decades chewing through gritty bread and boiled fish bones. Dental pain was a fact of life. When a tooth cracked or rotted, you didn't go to a specialist, you turned to your family's old remedies, passed down like recipes. Warm beer rinses, mashed onion poultices, or simply chewing on a damp reed until the pain dulled. Sometimes a neighbor would help you extract a particularly bad one, tie it to a string, brace you against a wall, and, well, you can imagine the rest. There's no record of anesthesia. Just wine, willpower, and hopefully a fast hand. You lean on a mudbrick wall, watching the stars while a group of children chew on licorice root. It's not just a snack. It's a natural breath freshener and mild antibacterial. Cheap, plentiful, and gently sweet. Plus, it keeps their mouths busy and their teeth marginally cleaner. Smart kids. One curious tool you'd sometimes find in homes, the humble toothpick. Often made from date palm thorns, fish bones, or slender reeds, these makeshift picks were surprisingly effective at dislodging food and, if you were careful, gently cleaning between teeth. You see a grandfather using one now, methodically scraping with quiet satisfaction while seated by an oil lamp. There's even evidence that some families pass down small ivory or wooden dental tools. Primitive tweezers, scrapers, even a kind of early floss, strips of linen waxed with beeswax and drawn between the teeth. They weren't common, but when they appeared, they showed how even the most modest household valued cleanliness. Yet there's no getting around the pain. When infection set in, you couldn't ignore it. The swelling, the throb, the way even a breeze against your cheek could feel like punishment from the gods. You'd sit in the dark, pressing a warm cloth to your jaw, whispering every prayer you could remember, even if none of them were about teeth. And yet, people kept going. They plowed, baked, painted, hauled fish, raised children, all with cracked molars and inflamed gums. Not because they liked pain, but because pain was part of the background music of life. You watch a woman tucking her baby into a linen wrap, humming a lullaby older than memory. Her teeth are crooked, one missing in the front. But her smile is luminous, warm, eternal. And that's something you start to realize, these people didn't need perfect teeth to be beautiful. Beauty, here, wasn't about symmetry. It was about health, spirit, and effort. Brushing with brick dust might sound awful, but it was an act of love. Of respect for the body. Even if you couldn't afford temple-grade incense, you tried. Even if your toothpaste tasted like sand and vinegar, you rinsed. Because sometimes, showing up to life, even with bad breath, is enough. So you sit under the stars a while longer, listening to the low hum of a lullaby, the scrape of a toothpick, and the quiet, unbothered chewing of a child who has no idea what sugar is. And for a moment, you almost believe your own mouth is cleaner. That history, in its dusty generosity, has gifted you a minty breeze from 3,000 years ago. Or maybe that's just the licorice root talking. You rise with the pink haze of dawn stretching across the horizon, and today your steps lead you toward something grander, toward power, wealth, and prestige. Yes, it's time we peek into the royal mouths of Egypt's elite. You make your way through the marble-pillared courtyards of a noble estate. Bronze mirrors catch morning light, perfume hangs in the air, and polished sandals clip-clop against imported Syrian tile. Here, where every gesture is practiced, every robe embroidered, you can be sure of one thing: appearances matter. And that includes your teeth. Among the wealthy, cleanliness wasn't just health, it was image, elegance, control. A bright smile could impress a guest, charm a priest, or show just how many servants you had to prepare your powder each morning. But don't get too excited. Because for all their beauty oils and gold jewelry, even the Egyptian upper class couldn't escape the dental curse of sand and sugar. In fact, they might have had it worse. While poor folks chewed onions and coarse bread, the elite dined on lavish feasts, soft fruits, honey-soaked pastries, sweet beer, imported wines, and richly spiced meats. Their diet was smoother, richer, and more likely to stick between the teeth and ferment into pain. And so, dental care among the elite became elaborate. You walk through a noblewoman's dressing chamber and spot a collection of delicate jars. One contains a pale green powder, crushed malachite mixed with natron. Another smells faintly of cloves and myrrh. She dips a carved ivory stick into the powder, twirls it between her palms, then hums softly while scraping her back molars. She finishes by rinsing her mouth with rosewater steeped in mint. Refreshing, and mildly antiseptic. Not bad, honestly. Wealthy households often had imported herbs and perfumes at their disposal: cinnamon from Punt, cardamom from Nubia, even tiny jars of frankincense resin. Mixed with natron, these made for the ancient world's fanciest toothpaste. Whether they helped or just made the pain smell better, well, historians still argue that. And then there's the fashion. Oh, yes, fashion even touched teeth. There's evidence that some members of the elite had decorative dental work. One mummy, likely a high priest, was found with a gold wire bracing two front teeth. Others had inlays, small stones or bits of colored paste pressed into the enamel. Was it functional? Maybe. Was it aesthetic? Almost certainly. Imagine smiling at your guests and flashing a glint of blue faience from your bicuspid. Stylish and confusing. You watch a nobleman being treated by his household healer. The man is reclined on a low divan, grimacing as a copper hook is inserted into a swollen gum. The healer whispers a hymn to Thoth, packs the wound with linen soaked in honey and resin, and carefully binds it with strips of clean cloth. The nobleman doesn't flinch. He's used to this. In fact, records suggest high-ranking Egyptians underwent dental treatments often, though the success rates were hit and miss. Infections remained common. But the idea was to preserve the appearance of control. Even in death, these standards held. Royal mummies were sometimes found with post-mortem dental adjustments. A tooth was filled or packed with resin not because it helped, but because it looked better. In the afterlife, you had to look your best. Some believe that the famed boy king, Tutankhamun, may have suffered from dental issues. His mummified remains show signs of an overbite and possible abscess. Did his court physicians try to treat it? Maybe. Did they succeed? Highly unlikely. But imagine the court gossip, Tut's royal smile not quite living up to the golden mask. You pass through the temple of Hatshepsut, queen and pharaoh, whose reign was marked by power, building, and, one imagines, a fair share of morning mouth rinses. Women in power, too, had to maintain their image, and their hygiene rituals were detailed and deliberate. Among the perfumes and face paint, mouth powders were prepared with equal reverence. Some included burnt eggshells, crushed pearls, and rare oils. Did these make a difference? Perhaps a little. But as with most elite things, the performance of cleanliness was half the point. One scroll from a noble estate even contains a morning ritual list: wash face, anoint hands with lotus oil, chew cinnamon bark, rinse mouth with cool water, thank the gods. It reads less like a medical routine and more like the ancient Egyptian version of a luxury influencer's day in the life. And yet, beneath the perfume, behind the gilded mirrors, their teeth told the truth. Even queens and priests couldn't avoid the grinding of quartz-laced bread, the decay brought by syrupy dates, the abscesses that pulsed beneath a smile. You pass a statue of a noble woman, immortalized in smooth limestone, lips perfectly sculpted. You imagine what lies beneath: cracked molars, worn enamel, perhaps even a gold-capped tooth meant to hide the pain. Beauty, preserved forever. Toothache, forgotten. So as you sit now in the cool stone corridor of an estate garden, watching lotus flowers sway in the breeze, you begin to understand something oddly comforting. Even those with all the resources in the world still suffered the same twinge, the same grimace, the same middle-of-the-night regret for chewing that one too sticky fig. And maybe, just maybe, they lay awake then as you do now, counting stars, breathing slowly, hoping tomorrow's tooth powder works just a little better than today's. Because in the end, gold jewelry is lovely, but a pain-free molar? That's true luxury. It's late afternoon now, and the village square is coming alive with stories. Merchants shout softly over fresh baskets of pomegranates, a child chases a runaway goose, and old men sit cross-legged beneath a fig tree, trading wisdom in the form of half-truths and long-winded metaphors. You take a seat nearby and realize something: oral health in ancient Egypt wasn't just about what people did, it was also about what they believed. And some of those beliefs were a little unusual. Let's talk about tooth worms. Yes, worms. Tiny, invisible creatures supposedly living inside your teeth, chewing away from within and causing pain. If that sounds absurd, don't laugh too quickly. This theory wasn't exclusive to Egypt. Variations existed in Mesopotamia, China, even medieval Europe. But in Egypt, it carried its own strange flavor. The idea was that toothaches weren't caused by decay or infection, they were the work of a wriggling little intruder. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians literally believed in the worm, or whether it was a metaphor for pain. But the image stuck: the ache, the hollowed-out feeling, the slow gnawing. It felt like something alive. To get rid of this mythical menace, the treatments ranged from the curious to the creatively horrifying. One method: burn a mixture of goose fat, myrrh, and donkey hair, and direct the smoke into your mouth through a reed tube. The idea: smoke out the worm. Side effect: probably also smoked your eyebrows off. You watch as an elderly woman performs such a ritual for her neighbor. She lights a small clay dish, wafts the smoke carefully into the patient's mouth, then whispers a protective spell. The patient coughs, gags, and then grins. Placebo or miracle? Who knows? But the ritual is as comforting as the result. Other remedies aim to confuse the worm. You'd apply contrasting temperatures, hot resin followed by cold beer, to drive it mad. Or mix strange, bitter substances like lizard fat with acacia sap, hoping the worm would get annoyed and wriggle out voluntarily. Spoiler: it didn't. And yet, these ideas weren't pure nonsense. Ancient Egyptians often described pain with remarkable accuracy. They noted how decay caused softening, how abscesses led to bubbling of the jaw, and how molars could crack like split reeds. They just didn't have microscopes. So they imagined what they couldn't see. What they did have, though, was ritual. Pain was never just physical, it was spiritual. You didn't just soothe a toothache, you calmed the gods, appeased the spirits, warded off evil forces lurking in the shadows of your gums. The priests of Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess of plague and healing, were often called upon in severe cases. She was feared, revered, and unpredictable. Her touch could cure, or curse. Offerings were made. Incense was burned. And sometimes, a sacred cat would be brought to purr beside the patient for added divine comfort. Yes, ancient Egypt weaponized cats medically. Try asking your dentist to do that. You lean back and listen as an old man begins telling a tale of a noble who suffered from the gnawing worm of the mouth, and who was finally healed by dreaming of the god Thoth, who gave him a golden tooth in a vision. When he awoke, the pain was gone. Dream healing was common, too. Sleep near a temple, receive a vision, wake cured, or at least reassured. Whether the worm fled your tooth in fear or simply grew bored, no one could say. But the relief was real enough. Amulets also played their part. Tiny carvings of Bes, the dwarf god of childbirth and protection, were worn on necklaces or tied to wrists. His image, a wild-eyed, tongue-out protector, was believed to scare off spirits, including those rumored to nest inside mouths. And here's a charming twist: certain love spells included lines about teeth. A clean mouth, sweet breath, and pain-free smile were considered attractive traits. Some incantations even prayed for lips that never bleed, teeth that shine like moonlight, and no worms to gnaw between them. A very specific Tinder profile, 1300 BCE edition. You begin to realize that all these beliefs, however strange they seem, offered comfort. In a world without antibiotics or X-rays, you relied on stories. On symbols. On the conviction that there had to be a reason for the pain, and therefore, a way to undo it. You stretch your legs as the sky begins to glow with the colors of coming dusk. The merchant stalls are closing, and a group of women sits in a circle, plaiting each other's hair and swapping dental remedies. One swears by clove paste, another insists on chewing lotus root, and a third says her grandmother lived to 70 with nothing but cold beer and prayer. Is it science? Not really. Is it medicine? Depends on who's asking. But it's part of something deeper, the endless human desire to make meaning from discomfort. To believe that the pain in your jaw is not just rot, but a story, a spirit, a test. And in some small, smoky courtyard, someone is always ready with a reed, a spell, and a little lizard fat, just in case the worm is listening. Dusk drapes the city in soft purples and deepening gold. Lamps are being lit one by one, casting flickering shadows onto whitewashed walls and the backs of sleepy cats. You follow the path toward the edge of the necropolis, where the dead rest, and the living still ask questions about how they lived. Because tonight, we peek into teeth beyond the grave. The ancient Egyptians didn't just treat dental pain during life, they worried about it in death, too. And that's not as strange as it sounds. After all, what good is entering the afterlife if you can't eat the offerings placed in your tomb? You trail behind a pair of workers hauling linen-wrapped bundles into a chamber tomb. The room smells of resin and ancient secrets. The sarcophagus is being prepared, and inside, along with amulets and shabtis, you'll often find something peculiar, a small jar of tooth powder. Yes. Tooth powder for the afterlife. To the Egyptians, bodily preservation was essential for eternity. If a tooth was broken or missing in life, that flaw might carry over into the next world. So embalmers sometimes repaired teeth during the mummification process. They'd pack cracked molars with resin, or reposition loose teeth with linen stuffing and gum paste. Historians still argue whether these procedures were done for health reasons or appearance. But many believe it was symbolic: if the body was whole, the soul could be, too. And it wasn't limited to royalty. Excavations of middle-class tombs have revealed dental tools, herbal pastes, and chew sticks placed among burial goods, just in case a molar flared up after death. You walk slowly past a line of sarcophagi, each painted with serene smiles and almond-shaped eyes. The artistry is meticulous. But archaeologists know the truth lies deeper, inside the skulls. Examinations of mummified remains have revealed a dental history written in calcium and pain. Cavities, abscesses, exposed pulp, even bone infections. In one royal mummy, a deep lesion in the jaw suggests chronic infection, likely causing excruciating pain before death. Yet the face shows no sign of suffering. Just peace. Because pain, like vanity, was meant to be left behind. Some high-status mummies show signs of attempted post-mortem dental restoration. That gold band in the back. Likely a cosmetic fix. The resin filling. More for visual polish than real function. A divine dental makeover. You pass an embalmer's workshop, quiet now but full of whispers. Here, amid natron baths and flint knives, they once debated whether to clean a decayed molar or leave it as is. One might argue, let the gods see the truth. Another might answer, let the gods see our effort. There's beauty in that, isn't there? Even knowing the tooth couldn't be saved, they still tried. Out of care. Out of custom. Out of hope that the soul might taste lotus fruit again without wincing. And while you're thinking of the dead, let's talk about something even more surprising, false teeth. Now, Egypt didn't have dentures in the modern sense. But there's some tantalizing evidence, gold wires, linen ties, even a few cases of animal teeth inserted into the jaws of mummies, that suggests an attempt to replace lost teeth. Was it functional? Not really. Was it symbolic? Absolutely. Imagine being embalmed with a lion's incisor tucked into your empty molar socket. Not just a repair, but a statement, strength, courage, a fierce bite in the afterlife. Whether this happened widely or was reserved for the eccentric wealthy remains unclear. But it's one more reminder that oral health was never just about hygiene, it was about identity. You stroll deeper into the necropolis, past murals of banquets, dancers, and feasts. In the depictions, everyone is smiling. No one is wincing. No one has a cheek swollen from an abscess. In the idealized afterlife, your teeth were white, even, and pain-free. And of course, you had eternal access to offerings. Loaves, figs, beer, honey cakes. If your teeth weren't up to the challenge, you'd be missing out. So preparing your mouth wasn't vanity, it was a form of spiritual readiness. Even the Book of the Dead, that sprawling guide to the underworld, contains references to bodily completeness. You had to pass various gates, recite spells, weigh your heart, and, ideally, not arrive with a gaping cavity in your smile. It's never stated outright, but one suspects, Anubis liked neat molars. Back in the living world, you glance up at a carving of Osiris seated on his throne, mouth curved in a knowing smirk. Was he judging toothaches, too? Perhaps. But if so, he likely understood. Because pain, decay, and healing, these were part of the human journey. Even gods must have had metaphors for that. So as you walk away from the tombs, leaving behind the silent wisdom of the dead, you take with you this strange comfort, that even in death, people cared for their teeth. Cared enough to clean them, to pack them, to pray for them. Because in the next world, as in this one, you never know when you'll need to smile. And no one wants to meet the gods with a bad case of morning breath. Now the stars are fully out, splashed across the Egyptian sky like crushed alabaster scattered over velvet. The wind picks up faint scents of lotus and damp stone as you make your way to one final, peculiar corner of the dental world, one rarely spoken of, but just as telling, the role of magic and dreams in healing the mouth. You step through the colonnaded entryway of a small temple nestled along the riverbank. This isn't a towering monument to Ra or Osiris, but a modest sanctuary devoted to Serket, a lesser-known scorpion goddess associated with healing and protection. Inside, it's quiet. A single oil lamp flickers beside a basin of cool water. And here, worshippers come not for grand rituals, but for relief from pain. Because in Egypt, magic and medicine were never far apart, especially when it came to the intimate agony of a toothache. The idea was simple: if your body hurt, it wasn't just your body. Something had gone wrong in the balance between the spiritual and the physical. Perhaps you spoke unkind words. Perhaps a minor god took offense. Perhaps, as we mentioned before, a tiny demon worm was chewing on your molars like an ancient popcorn kernel. Whatever the cause, the solution often came in dreams. Egyptians believed dreams were not just nighttime distractions, but direct lines to divine wisdom. So when all else failed, after you tried the onion poultice, the frankincense rinse, and the donkey hair fumigation, you'd head to a temple of sleep. These were known as incubation sanctuaries. People with persistent ailments would travel, sometimes from great distances, to spend a night on sacred bedding, surrounded by incense and chanting, waiting for a god to visit them in their dreams with a cure. You picture yourself curling up on a mat of woven flax. The air is warm, humming with insects. Priests murmur prayers around you. Your jaw aches, your mouth throbs, and you close your eyes, not just from exhaustion, but from trust. If you were lucky, the god Imhotep might appear, a deified architect and healer, known for his wisdom and bedside manner. He might whisper a recipe into your dream, or simply touch your cheek and remove the pain. When you woke, you describe your vision to the priests, who would interpret it and give you a follow-up treatment based on what the divine visit suggested. Sometimes it was surprisingly practical: boil barley with vinegar and hold it in the mouth. Other times, it leaned symbolic: bury a pebble in the east, eat only white foods, and avoid speaking aloud for a day. Healing didn't always need logic. It needed meaning. Historians still debate whether these dreams were seen as literal divine messages or powerful psychosomatic therapy. Either way, many Egyptians woke feeling better. Perhaps the rest helped. Perhaps the hope did. Of course, magic wasn't only used in temples. It lived in homes, too. You pass a family shrine tucked into a courtyard wall. Little figures carved from limestone stand beside a bowl of milk and a sprig of mint. Here, simple spells were muttered over painful mouths, spells like, "Come forth, O light of Ra, cleanse this mouth as the sun clears shadow. May no worm dwell, no demon stay, no pain remain. By Sekhmet's fire and Thoth's word, let peace return to these teeth." Chanted 3 times, over water, before bed. Whether or not it worked, it surely made one feel cared for. And then there were protective charms, small amulets carved in the shape of molars, crocodiles, or eyes. One intriguing example is the tooth-eye glyph, combining the hieroglyphs for perception and pain. Worn around the neck or tucked into a headband, it served as a ward against both dental aches and gossip, oddly enough. You smile, imagining someone saying, "No, it's not just fashion, it protects me from molars and rumors." Magic also extended into everyday tools. A chew stick might be blessed before use. A bowl used for rinsing might have a prayer scratched into the underside. Even a child's first lost tooth could be ceremonially buried under a date tree, to encourage strong new growth. It's oddly familiar, like the tooth fairy, but with better botany. One of the most charming records from a rural papyrus describes a wife who, every time her husband suffered a toothache, would place an amulet in his left sandal and bake him sweet bread with crushed mint. He claimed it worked every time. He also claimed he had a toothache nearly every week. Coincidence? So, while we often think of magic as separate from medicine, in Egypt, they were partners. If honey soothed the gums, a hymn soothed the spirit. If frankincense cleansed the mouth, prayer cleared the soul. And maybe, just maybe, the combination of herbs, hope, and human warmth was more powerful than any single treatment could be. You leave the temple of circuit now, your steps slow, your thoughts wandering. In this world of sun gods and shadowy ailments, pain was never just pain. It was a story, one you shared with gods, neighbors, and dream visitations. And with the right offering, and maybe a whispered chant or two, even a toothache could become tolerable. It's deep night now. The Nile is dark and still, silvered only by moonlight. You walk slowly along the water's edge, where reeds sway like sleepwalking dancers and frogs mutter soft lullabies. But before we close our journey, there's one more place to visit. A place where pain turned into profession, the world of ancient Egyptian healers, especially the ones who dared to treat teeth. You duck into a shaded corner of a bustling village, where a modest structure, half clinic, half temple, once stood. This was the domain of the SWNW, or healer. Not quite a doctor in the modern sense, but not a magician either. Something in between. A blend of pharmacist, priest, and hopeful inventor. And among these healers, a few brave souls became tooth specialists. Well, sort of. You won't find a plaque that says, Dr. Neferhotep, DDS, hanging outside. But scrolls like the Ebers Papyrus and Kahan Papyrus mention individuals who focused on the mouth and jaw. They weren't officially dentists, but if your molar exploded during dinner, they were your best bet. The tools? Simple, but effective for their time. You spot them lined neatly on a low wooden table, bronze picks and tweezers, small knives for scraping tartar, and hollow reeds to rinse the mouth. A few rare examples even include tiny drills, operated by a bow-like mechanism. Not for cavities, more likely for draining abscesses. With no anesthetic. Yikes. One record speaks of a healer using acacia thorns to prod a sore gum, followed by a rinse of red wine and goat's milk. Sounds like a terrible cocktail. Still, it probably did something. Historians still argue whether these tooth specialists were respected or feared. Some were clearly revered, called upon by nobles, even pharaohs. Others worked quietly, scraping away rotten back alleys, paid in onions or beer. Either way, it wasn't glamorous. Being the guy who poked around inside your neighbor's festering mouth. Let's just say it didn't win you many dinner invites. But it's clear they developed techniques. You settle in and watch one of them at work. A young man kneels beside an older woman holding her cheek. He inspects her swollen gum, nods thoughtfully, then reaches for a poultice of mashed garlic and palm oil. Gently, he packs it in place, ties a band of linen around her jaw, and murmurs a few comforting words. She winces, but not in fear. She's grateful. Because even if it doesn't cure the infection, it means someone tried. And in this world, effort mattered. There was no floss. No Novocaine. No porcelain crowns. Just a belief that relief was possible, and someone willing to help. One of the most fascinating figures in medical history, Hesiare, was a high official from around 2600 BCE. His tomb includes the title, Chief of Dentists and Physicians. It's unclear if he truly specialized in teeth, but someone must have, for that title to exist. Imagine, 4,500 years ago, being honored in death for poking around inside people's mouths. That's commitment. You walk past papyri inscribed with detailed treatments, not just for tooth pain, but for the taste of metal in the mouth, the gums that flow like water, and the shaking of the jaw. The terms may be vague, but the experience is familiar. There are even records of dietary prescriptions for dental issues. Avoid dates for 3 days, one healer wrote, and drink only warm beer with cumin. Honestly, the modern version might be, skip the sugar and hydrate, so maybe they were onto something. One healer in particular, his name lost to time, is described in a tomb carving applying pressure to a man's cheek with both hands. Whether he's massaging, restraining, or preparing to yank something, it's not clear. But the fact that someone thought this moment deserved to be carved into stone tells you how important the act of healing was. And these healers didn't work alone. They relied on herbalists, who foraged marshlands for willow bark, a natural source of salicin, cousin to aspirin, grinders who prepared fine powders from crushed minerals, and scribes who recorded each experiment, every triumph, every failure. You pass a clay tablet etched with symbols, a recipe, a note, a warning. Maybe all three. It reads, "Do not apply oil of scorpion tail if the gum bleeds too fast." Hard to argue with that. Of course, not every healer succeeded. Some tried ambitious surgeries, others experimented with strong acids. A few, one suspects, were more interested in payments than patients. But the effort remained. People kept trying to ease one another's suffering, one molar at a time. And even if their tools were crude, even if their spells sounded silly, you realize something: they created the foundation for what would become centuries of medical advancement. Because every time someone dared to dig into a swollen gum, to tie gold wire around a cracked incisor, to bless a stick and call it medicine, they were saying, you don't have to suffer alone. So you sit with that thought now, gazing across the water, the temple lights flickering in the distance. Somewhere, a healer packs away his tools. Somewhere, a patient takes their first pain-free breath in days. And somewhere across time, they smile. The Nile glows faintly in the moonlight now, stretching like a slow breath through the dark. It's the final stretch of our strange, sand-swept stroll through the oral history of ancient Egypt. And there's no better place to end it than where we began, inside the daily rhythm of ordinary lives, where dental care wasn't heroic or ceremonial, but just another chore. Mundane. Relatable. Endearingly human. You step into the courtyard of a modest home, shaded by a fig tree and surrounded by walls of sun-baked brick. A family is finishing their evening meal, lentils, barley cakes, a bit of dried fish. No honey cakes tonight, too expensive. A small boy yawns, wipes his mouth, and dutifully pulls out his chewed willow stick. Tooth-brushing wasn't always a ritual of wealth or medicine. For many Egyptians, it was simply a thing you did before sleep, like folding your linen or checking the oil lamp. The chew stick, rough and fibrous, is darkened at one end from use. He gnaws it casually, rhythmically, until the wood fibers fray into a bristle. Then, with a practiced hand, he scrubs each tooth with surprising precision. The same way you might have once dragged a wet toothbrush over your molars without even thinking. Except, his toothbrush grew from a tree and probably tastes like bark. The family doesn't talk much. The sky is full of stars, and the breeze is cool. The mother hands each child a mouthful of water, which they swish and spit into a clay gutter that leads away from the house. A simple rinse. No peppermint, no fluoride, but enough to loosen stray bits of barley from between their teeth. Nearby, a grandmother leans over a basin, gently rubbing her gums with a damp scrap of linen. She hums as she works, something tuneless but comforting. You recognize the movement, slow, circular, familiar. Some things, it seems, don't change. Historians still argue whether the average Egyptian truly cared about their teeth, or whether these little habits were more about comfort than hygiene. But watching this scene, you get the sense they cared enough. Enough to avoid pain. Enough to maintain dignity. Enough to make tooth cleaning part of the rhythm of life. The tools were humble: reeds, salt, vinegar, sand, sometimes honey. But the intention was clear: keep the mouth clean, even if it stung a little. Sometimes, the simplest methods were the most effective. And then there were the superstitions, still alive, even now. A small charm hangs from the doorway, carved in the shape of an open mouth. It's meant to guard against gossip and gum disease. Efficient. A young girl pauses to whisper a quick prayer to Bess before bed, just in case the tooth demon decides to visit tonight. She tucks her chew stick under her pillow like a talisman. Even bedtime stories involve teeth. Tonight's tale is about a crocodile who loses all his teeth after biting a cursed palm tree, and must go on a journey through the desert to find replacements. Along the way, he learns to brush with aloe and floss with lotus stems. It's all a little ridiculous, but you laugh anyway. You've probably heard worse from YouTube channels, let's be honest. You glance around the courtyard one more time. The lamps are out now. The breeze whistles gently through the reed fence. And the family sleeps, jaws relaxed, teeth worn but cared for. Nothing perfect. Nothing sparkling. But there's peace in the ordinary. You lie down beside them in the quiet sand. The chew sticks, the powders, the prayers, they were never magic in themselves. But they were tools of intention. Of hope. Of trying. And maybe that's the lesson. That even when history feels distant or exotic, what truly lingers are the little things: the soft scrape of a stick across enamel, the rinse of warm water, the sleepy promise that tomorrow, you'll do it all again. Because teeth, like people, endure. They grind. They wear. They ache. But they also smile. And sometimes, they even survive 3,000 years to remind you, humans have always done their best with what they had. So rest easy now. Your molars may be modern, your toothbrush plastic, your toothpaste minty and fluorescent. But deep down, you're not that different from a sleepy Egyptian child curling up with bark in their mouth and sand between their toes. And that's oddly comforting, isn't it? So now, as the air grows cooler and the world begins to slow, let's ease into the final stillness of the night. Let your breath soften, long and slow, like the slow ripple of the Nile in moonlight. Let the imagery fade, the temples, the chewing sticks, the jars of strange powder. Let them drift downstream into silence. Imagine now a soft linen pillow beneath your head, filled with reeds and dreams. The stars above are ancient, familiar, watching. Your jaw is slack, relaxed. Your thoughts, like grains of sand, slip gently through your fingers. There's no more need to search, no more need to understand every detail. The story has been told. The journey through crushed rock, gum poultices, priestly incantations, and the flicker of oil lamps, it's all behind you now. You are floating on a current of quiet. You've wandered through tombs and kitchens, past crocodile god spells and the whisper of temple prayers. You've watched children brushing in the dark and queens rinsing with rosewater. And now, the only thing left is rest. Let your shoulders sink. Let your thoughts blur at the edges. Let the hush of ancient night wrap around you like a soft cotton shroud. Nothing is chasing you. Nothing is urgent. Everything, yes, even that persistent little ache, is fading. Sleep, dear listener. Sleep, with the comforting knowledge that people have always endured strange rituals to soothe their pains, and always will. Your story, too, will drift through time someday. But for now, just rest.